Thursday Night Talk. Tonight we're very glad to receive Jeremy Young, who is an experimental sound artist located in Montreal, Quebec. Hi, Jeremy.
Hi.
Before we talk about the kind of music you are doing, I was curious to know if music is part of your primary education, and what are the artists who were major influences for, and who inspire you? It can be in music, but also in different artistic field.
Well, the first part of your question is an easy answer. I think I've always grown up around music. Not that my parents were musicians, but there was just music in the house always, always, always. I grew up in New York, so I moved to Canada when I was 18. That's when I started to really kind of figure out how to like blend my influences into my playing as a musician. And so the influences, like the stuff that I was listening to, started to make its way into my playing style. So it would be, back then it was, again, always a diverse sort of mixture of styles, but I was really into jazz and improvised music, and then I got into avant-garde jazz and more free improv, like, you know, coming from all the various traditions, like Derek Bailey and Peter Brotzman and you know, like the sort of European UK scene, as well as, you know, Ornette Coleman and Albert Eiler and Cecil Taylor and Jackie McLean, and, you know, the New York sort of and Chicago player, like Art Ensemble of Chicago and Sun Ra and stuff like that. So there's that influencing my playing in a free way, but then there's also the sort of like Glenn Branca, Sonic Youth, like really minimal post-punk, even Talking Heads and stuff like that, like Lower East Television and stuff like that, sort of learning how to play more angular, minimal, repetitive stuff. All of this stuff when I was like 18, 19 was kind of coming into my brain and informing my playing as a guitarist in little bands that I would start here and there, and then one big band that eventually got pretty popular here back in the US, and we did some touring. That's not a project anymore that exists, but once I started getting on stage, I think I was like maybe, I want to say like 21 or something when I first started really like touring. Once I started getting on stage, and then you have to kind of set your stuff up, you have to sound check, you have to understand sound in a room, you have to understand your sound coming out of the amp, the pedals, to make sure that there's no feedback, there's no stuff that's going out of control every single night. That kind of like working mentality as a musician was probably the biggest education I had in terms of developing my sound, because then you start to incorporate new elements and you realize, what do I like, what do I don't like? You start chipping away at stuff that is unnecessary or problematic. You start developing a sound that is consistent, but allows you to sort of feel free and energetic while you're on stage. So I think, interestingly, the sort of second half of my life as a musician, which is more about analog recording techniques, sort of compositional experimentation, John Cage inspired aleatoric practices and processes, conceptual art, philosophical underpinnings, and stuff like that. The second half of my development as a musician, I think it was birthed on stage as a touring musician when I was younger, because it's both understanding sound and solving problems, but then realizing that there's so much more to what happens in a room sonically than the note that you're playing on the guitar. And that can go in so many different ways. It can be textural, rhythmic, timbral, microtonal, you know, compositional, improvisational. Like, there's all these ways to approach creating sound. And I was like really young when I started to think, well, it can't just be this. It can't just be guitar, bass, piano, drums, right? Like, there has to be more than that. So, yeah, I mean, I could talk about my influences in terms of working on tape, like everything from William Basinski to Luke Ferrari to you know, Stockhausen to a very small band in Montreal called Exhaust, which was just an improvising trio with tape, bass, and drums. Like all that kind of stuff is great. But really, it was like, I think it stopped being like in my early 20s, it stopped being how do I transmit my influences into my playing, and more how do I explore the fun shit that I think is just really exciting and do it in a way that I can handle and I can kind of feel free and feel creative with. So it was really kind of transmitting out, I think, starting from there.
I am glad that you speak about this linked between the composition, notes, music, and sound on the other side, and all these things mixed together, and trying to focus on what is best when you go on stage and on tour for practical reasons, but also for because this is the very essence of music, and my channel is about this, making links between the two. It's indeed, and this is neglected too many times, and yeah.
Well,
but before we move on, I totally agree with you. I mean, I have a lot of conversations with musicians who originate their ideas practically in the studio, which is totally fine, or sound artists who are conceptualizing pieces with a lot of the end result or the processes kind of already thought out. And I think the difference with somebody like me and a lot of musicians that I kind of came up with is that those ideas are originated on the stage. Something happens in improvisation, or something happens somewhere where there's an inkling of an idea or a concept that is what is either a mistake or just something you'd like to work out in the moment, and it sticks in your brain, and you're like, that I want to develop. And whenever the next time I'm in my studio or some other studio is, that's when I'm going to put a little note, write a note to myself, and I'm going to develop that. But the originating point, I think, is like in a live environment, and it's always been like that for me. And that is something that, in a way, I think sets me and some of my peers apart from, just a lot of really great artists that are on the scene right now, but who sort of go on stage like once or twice per year to present their work. It's a different feeling. It's like this work was fully thought out in my little world, or in the world that I'm creating sonically, versus just like taking what's out there in the world and kind of then reducing it into how do I transmit this through my little voice here with my tools and stuff. So
I think also that it's normal to take the best out of some things that we feel primarily that it's kind of contingencies, but in fact this is where you get creative. Oh, this thing, let's work on it. It was random, but let's get it out of this random field and make it more about this. Yeah. So nothing replaces listening in terms of discovering the music of an artist, but I feel like according to your Bandcamp, there are, I would say, two big types I see of your recent works. There are what I would call the experimental, but I don't know if it's technical or it's, for example, like Arc of Steam, when you let this loop exhaust until it's demagnetized. I find this is raw material. And then there are other things like collaboration, where what I like is there are experimentations on sound, but there is poetry, there is lyricism, and I really love that, especially when there are collaboration. Would you agree with this description I make?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think of it in a different way, but you're not wrong. You're 100% right. The way that I think of it is more okay. Well, there's two things actually that I think I would respond to that. I think in a way, all of my work is aleatoric in nature, in that, and chance based in nature, in that I never want to be the sole organizer of sound in my work. I need there to be stuff that is just simply chance based. And I can manipulate and work with stuff, whether it's the source material, like Arc of Steam was just a random loop that I made by accident, by just splicing tape blind. Like I wasn't, and the source material on the tape you barely even hear to begin with, so it almost doesn't matter. But so much of my work is just finding sound, whether it's like, look, I have like hundreds of tape reels that are just like lying around. It's like my whole studio is just tape reels. I just buy these things on eBay. Whatever's on the tape, I'll find a way to use it. I'll find a way to create something from that. Whether it's like it ends up being like a collage, or it ends up being more fragmented or more elongated or whatever. Like what I'm trying to say is that there are artists who work with tape who are really into the collage aspect of it, and like really make a thing of sort of, this is like a slice of like everything all at you at once. And I love that. I think it's cacophonous. I think it's energetic. It's fantastic. And the performer becomes the sort of almost like a DJ, where they're like Christian Marclay style, just sort of collaging sounds, but the performer is the center of the music making aspect of it. With me, I take a little bit of a step back, where I have my own processes and my own sort of things, but the source material kind of has its own life on the side. And I think that goes through all of my work. And the source material could be from me, like in the case of my latest release, August Tape Sketches, which is 100% just solo guitar improvisations. But then I dubbed it to tape and I blind spliced. And so the aleatoricism, the chance-based aspect, comes from the fact that I have no idea what's on those tapes. It's me, and it's my recordings, but in the moment when I'm going to put the tape into the machine and let it roll, I just have to work with whatever I'm hearing in the moment. And so the source material is, again, it's chance-based. I have no control over that, but the act as an artist for me is I'm responding to it. I'm letting it live its own life. And I'm just sort of working through my techniques and my processes as an artist to make something of it or whatever. So throughout all my work, that is something that I think I take really seriously. But you're right in that it branches out into two different ways of working. And I think the difference is, from my end, and maybe it's the same way that you see it, but it's just you're interpreting it differently, is there are pieces that I think are developed in like a residency situation, or with a conceptual framework already built in, where it's like, this is what I'm doing, and I'm not going to leave this. I'm really just going to stay within this bubble, because the concept or the parameters of the residency are built in, and I want to hold myself to those limitations. Versus works like Amaro and August Tape Sketches, and other works that I've done. I can't. Spokes is a very old piece of mine that's like this, but where there is a concept and there's a generating input moment where it's like, this is sort of how I'm going to be operating here, but the end result is totally free of limitations. I really let it go until I feel like the work is complete. And that was the case with Amaro, where there was a lot of work being done in my studio. There's a lot of things that are kind of coming in and affecting my compositional process, and I'm chipping away, but then I'm building, and I'm chipping away, and I'm building. It's like constantly sort of like limiting and then re-expanding. Like, yeah, just doing improvisations with the oscillators, doing these different techniques of double loop collage with different tonal systems with my oscillators, and letting that stuff play out, letting me hear it and respond to it and react to it. And then I come up with an idea. Okay, I like this. Let me build on this, but not in the way that I was building on it before. And then you take it to a different place than it ever could have gone. So to me, I see my work as like, some stuff is like highly limited. Piano Vert was just three piano tape loops, and I just let it go. Arc of Steam, very limited, one tape loop, just let it go to the end. And then the Poetics of Time Space was done in a residency at a museum. That was like severely limited in terms of what I could and couldn't do, versus work that just sort of is allowed to grow and blossom in ways that are unpredictable. So that's how I see it.
Unfortunately, I was not able to attend to your concert in Riga, and I was curious to see more about the stage technique that you have, where some of the tapes are somewhere, and then you grab them. How do you proceed? We will put some pictures of a concert taken by Richard, but so there is a pre-made things. You know what are in the tapes, or more or less?
This is what separates this latest tour that I did in Europe, where unfortunately we were supposed to meet up and it didn't work out. But and I'm continuing to do a few performances in Canada and in the US this year with this setup. But this is what separates this setup from what I have always done before, which is that normally I have my gear, which is contact mics, radios, an electromagnetic frequency capturing device and amplifier, and my oscillators. And my oscillators are sort of the musical element, and everything else is textural, rhythmic, timbral, atmospheric, whatever. But I normally kind of just have my gear. Sometimes it changes from tour to tour what I use and what I don't use, but that's the setup, and I improvise. Or maybe I have some work that I'm sort of working out on the road. It's like a theme, and I'll attack that theme, and then I'll create variations, or I'll move away from it or develop it or whatever. But basically it's improvised. And the gear is not, I mean, it's just there. There's no prefix source material. There's no sampling. The difference between that, that's what I almost always do. On this tour that I just did, and to perform this work, it's also improvisational, but it's only entirely prefix source material. So it's those solo guitar improvisations from the album that are cut to tape, and they're on tape loops, and they're available for me to take at will. But the difference is that and I kind of improv my way through a piece, but it isn't really random. And the reason is, well, let me see if I could show you. just grab this. Oh, you can see in the background. That's some of the tape loops in the background. In preparation for this tour, I reorganized the original loops that I made in the recording, August tape sketches. Not really reorganized. I just sort of organized them, if I'm being honest. And I decided, okay, this goes with this. This, this one loop, which is kind of mostly a drone or very minimal, could be an introduction to this loop, which is more of a chord progression with 2.5 or 3 chords that are kind of looping around. These things work together. They're in the same key. So I'm not performing the album, but I'm kind of basically the album. I've deconstructed it back to its original source material, and now I'm redeveloping it in a new way in the live show. But it's in the same way that I made the album. It's just the end result is totally different. So I can really quickly just show you. So this is sort of, I don't know if you could see that on the camera. Well, whatever. But anyway, I write on the loops. I just write notes like different, the piece, this one, I don't know why it's called Kelso. I think I saw that word somewhere and I just wrote it on the tape loop. But this is part of this piece. So there's a prefixed, maybe 8 or 10 or 12 loops that can be incorporated into this piece. And when playing live, I might decide to use only 4. I might decide to use all of them. I might make the piece flow in a way that is a little bit different than last night. So let me try this out. And, so it's still improvisational, but the source material is kind of just there waiting for me. So I'm not grabbing random loops like I might have done in the past.
And yeah, as following, I have some kind of provocative question for people who are really outside this kind of methods and universe. Why loops and tapes instead of bringing a laptop on stage with pre-recorded sound and the DAW? Why did you make this choice?
Well, I don't think that my answer to that question is the same as most other artists who use analog equipment like oscillators and modular synths and tape and stuff. I've never used a laptop to make music. I mean, I'll record albums and stuff like that, but that's not indicative of my process. It's a personal preference why I don't use the laptop, but I think it's really important for me why I do use the equipment I use. And I consider them to just be like instruments like anything else. The reason I like working with analog equipment is because to me, and actually this goes into the entire philosophy of the record that I made a couple years ago. It came out last year called Amaro. The whole thing is that as an improviser of any instrument, you are working on your technique, guitar, saxophone, piano, or whatever. You're working on your understanding of music, your understanding of your voice, your listening abilities. But I think one of the most important aspects that almost never gets talked about is you're working on your body. It's a form of training and exercise, and it's a form of haptic response, like hand to eye coordination or hand to ear coordination. And in electronic music, that never gets talked about. No, the only time I ever hear people talking about hand-eye coordination is turntablism. Like Kid Koala, Christian Marclay, Maria Chavez, people who are working with the physical sort of nature of turntables. But that's all electronic music. Even with laptop stuff, we just never talk about it. And my problem with laptop music, from a personal standpoint, is that most times it's completely devoid of that aspect of it because it's so. A lot of it is pre-dialed in. That's just the nature of the technology. It's a convenience. Your parameters are already there. You just have to move the fader somewhere or whatever. And the sound sources are already there. You just have to click it in. So So that aspect of making electronic work, and especially in an improvisational setting, is just void. I do know artists who are very active and bodily when it comes to digital synths and yeah, whatever. That's great and that's awesome. For me, the most important thing is I need to develop my relationship as an artist with my body and this equipment. So whether it's the oscillators, and I know this sounds stupid, but moving the faders, not the faders, but literally like the frequency dial and stuff to change the pitch between like what would be, like a B flat and an A natural or something. All of those microtonal pitches in between, I need my ears to be so precise in terms of what I'm hearing, what I want, and how I'm going to achieve it with my finger dexterity. And then what happens with my other hand is that I'm moving the volume faders to make sure that this C5, a higher pitch C, doesn't just come in super high pitched as opposed to the C2 that's like, a low frequency tone where you really kind of need to up the gain or whatever. So I'm volume modulating. I'm modulating a little bit of reverb and delay to make sure that the pitch doesn't get out of control or that it sits really nicely and it's not too harsh on the ears. Because I'm working with square waves and sine waves, I hear something, I have it in my mind's eye, I'm trying to transmit a vision, but I'm also responding to exactly what is going on in the speakers. And I'm working with my hands in really subtle adjustments and stuff to make sure that it's all working through my body. So, to get back to your original question, the reason I work with tape is that the physical thing, I'm holding something. Like the sound is in my hands. I love that. And I will never not love that. That is so important for me as a musician and an artist, but also just, look, if you're an audience person, what's more interesting? Seeing loops going around and seeing somebody running back and forth and making physical adjustments to the sound or whatever, or somebody that's kind of just behind a screen. Like, I'm sorry, but I'm going to go with the former.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. There are two aspects. The visual aspect as, this live performance, something happening. But I feel like, don't you think like music like Kevin Drum is doing, or Rafael Torrald, for example, these are, or what you may have been doing, or Eliane Radig, they're speaking directly to the body. And what I feel like you say is completely relevant. Yeah.
Absolutely. I totally agree about Radig as well as Pauline Oliveros. For one thing, it's like it can be electronic, it can be minimal, but it just sits inside of you. I love that, and I agree. Kevin Drum kind of does that as well. I mean, it's very physical. Mika Vainio as well, like very electronic. But I mean, Mika Vainio always used sort of analog oscillators and stuff, and it was really heavy. But it just sits inside of you, and fills you up. I mean, Sun and Stephen O'Malley as well, but I mean, that's not so electronic, but the other thing I think that is worth mentioning about the sort of the audience's perspective is that I just think like electronic music comes from everything else. Like electronic music, like it takes influences from everywhere. Like dance music kind of mostly coming out of African music and like African minimal music, and like kind of made its way into techno, and like there are so many ways to sort of transmit those influences and stuff. And I think when you bring it into the physical realm, it really takes on a punk aesthetic, like, I don't know, watching Rancid or something on stage, like what they're doing is so minimal musically. Like there's just a few chords, it's super repetitive or whatever, but the physicality of that music, it's just coming at you in these pulses and waves, and there's like, that's just so exciting and interesting. And I don't make harsh music like that in any way. I mean, for electronic music and for noise music, I think my music is pretty puny. But like, to me, I think it's just important that there's this physical presence on stage. So it's not really about the gear. Like, it's not a gear thing. It's just, I like the idea that the sound lives in like on tape and in, you know, the circuit boards and in the tubes of these oscillators and stuff. Like, it's, there's a physical manifestation of sound that kind of comes through, and I just love it. It's a presence. It's a presence that I'm sort of mediating as an artist when I'm on stage with it and improvising with it, and I love it.
Yeah.
So, as a direct consequence, sorry, if I understand, you are making the mastering of your albums to control until the final cut, the EQs of the sound.
No, I love working with other engineers. Whenever possible, I try not to mix my own records, although budget-wise, it just lately I've had to kind of go into the mixing of my albums. But when it comes to mastering, I always work with other engineers. To me, that's like a collaboration that I welcome all the time. And I'm a really collaborative musician. I mean, it's only like Amaro is a solo record, but it's really the foundation is those duet collaborations between I think like 8 other artists, maybe 6 or something. But I mean, it's a solo record, but it's really collaborative. This latest album, August Tape Sketches, is the most like non-collaborative I've ever worked. But therein again, I mean, I was working with a visual artist, and I was working with Giuseppe Elassi to do the mastering, who I love working with him. He's a wonderful engineer and artist. And so, you know, it's good to sort of incorporate other people's ears whenever possible. So that's pretty important to me. I'm not too concerned with, like, I almost never have like a vision for the sound of a record. To me, it's more like compositional, and did I achieve what I wanted to do as an artist or something? And then I'm very happy to give it up to somebody to impart their vision on the final product sonically. And I feel that way about labels too. Like, once I've created the work, like if a label wants to go in a certain direction with packaging or with artwork or marketing language or whatever, I'm all for it. I'm really all for it.
Yeah, this collaboration aspect was going to be my next question. I was amazed to see the wide number of projects you are involved in. So there is also this Soundfly Academy that is but it's connected, I feel, and the label and book publishing. The name is Palaver. That's it.
Oh, this is that's pretty defunct. That's kind of an old thing. I mean, yeah, it goes into my my artistic sort of vision and stuff, but it's definitely not around anymore. But it was basically an audiobook publishing house that I founded with my wife, my partner, where we recorded independent books published by. So the authors owned the rights to their text, and the works were published by independent publishers. So we worked with the publisher and we worked with the author directly to record audio versions of their books as a courtesy to them, and then we commissioned a composer or a musician or producer to create an original soundtrack to the book, and. The idea was that it was a revenue share project, so we incurred all the costs, and then we just shared the revenue amongst all 4 of those parties: us, the musician, the author, and the original publisher. We did a few projects, and it was really wonderful. It's just the amount of time it takes to record and edit an audiobook is really a full-time thing, and I didn't have a full-time amount of time. And then in order to grow the business, we probably would have needed financing or investment, and that just wasn't an option back then. So it kind of petered out, but the project itself, I think, had a lot of merit. And honestly, the main goal was just to try to create new avenues for audiobook and publishing that could, it was sort of like a long tail model where if enough independent authors and publishers had the ability to present their work in audio, eventually there'd be a little bit of a critical mass of independent modeled opportunities to lean on the sheer monopoly that is Audible and ACX and Amazon. Who, for a lot of people that don't know, ACX is like the sole distributor of audiobook files pretty much globally. Like, there's really no one else that's doing it. And so Audible, which is owned by ACX, and Amazon are kind of in cahoots together in terms of being primarily the sole like distribution platform. It's like, imagine if musicians only had Spotify. Like that's your one revenue source is a horrible giant company that wants to pay you as little as possible and pay their shareholders as much as possible. So that's pretty much the situation with audiobooks right now. And independent publishers and platforms are trying to do whatever they can, but it's really just like a megalith. So the idea was just to kind of nudge up against the big players in the industry and see if there was a market for there to be an independent distribution platform eventually. And I'm really passionate about that. I just don't think I'm the guy who's going to do that.
And about Soundfly Academy, it seems...
Well, that's where Soundfly comes in, actually.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because in a way, I mean, Soundfly is the company that was founded by my bandmate in Sontag Shogun, Ian Temple. He's the piano player in my band. He founded the company. I got brought in early, and it's online education. It's affordable. It's global, and it's a community with an incredible diversity of topics, as well as the community members are all over the world. There's a lot of them, and it's a positive community for musicians, so it's non-competitive. It's a peer-to-peer learning network, and the customer service for our company is the number one thing. So I know that sounds like really markety and weird, but for every single person that comes through the community, you basically have the Soundfly staff at your full disposal. You could ask us questions at any time. We help out. We promote student work. We put a lot of our resources towards developing students' work in one-on-one learning capacities. We feature students on the blog and the newsletter, whatever. We're constantly sort of trying to elevate the work of our community in a way that I think a lot of other online education platforms simply just don't care about. Like a lot of education platforms tend to be kind of Netflix style, where you just sign up, you enjoy the content, and you stay subscribed or unsubscribed or whatever until yeah. So we're a lot more sort of like interpersonal with the way that we do our model, but yeah, Soundfly is an amazing platform. At this point now, we've worked with instructors like Kimbra, Comtrues. We're about to launch a course actually in 2 days on Ryan Lott from Sunlux, who's an incredible film score composer and pop artist. He just did the score for this A24 film called Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is going nuts. Jalen, Kiefer, a whole bunch of incredible artists. So we're just working with more and more artists that are wonderful to sort of teach the courses and stuff. That's my my day job. So I'm really lucky to be able to be working in this way, educating people with music, and helping to sort of build a really positive musical community out in the world, and helping people improve their skills. I'm not sure that has anything to do with me as an artist. I mean, I guess you could maybe draw some through lines if you want. Yeah, there's probably something there, but I think it just comes from the vision of my bandmate, first of all, to create a really like life-changing platform for musicians in terms of developing their skills and their networks. But it just comes from an empathetic view of capitalism. Like, you know, if we're going to charge for a service and a product, if we're going to make a business out of asking musicians to contribute their money, how can we make this the most empathetic and sympathetic model possible so that everyone is actually really happy to be part of this this consumer transaction? Like, we don't want to take people's money if they're not comfortable. Like, if you signed up and it's not what you wanted, you 100% of the time you get a refund. You know what I mean? It's like,
I don't know.
Yeah, and all the questions cannot be found on some Facebook forums, or because I think right now what I feel I see in what you are telling is also being able to help people address the right questions before finding answers, because this is one of the major problem, I think, when it's about...
That's important.
Yeah, that matters a lot, yeah.
yeah, and also, I mean, simply just to kind of keep this point going a little bit further is, when it comes to education, I think the value of having somebody working with you, whether it's literally just somebody in the community who's listening to your tracks and giving you feedback, like a peer-to-peer network, if it's somebody who is more of a customer service person who's just guiding you through what's available, or who's just open to listening to your concerns, or if it's somebody more established, like a coach or a mentor, which is all of which Soundfly offers, and is built into our model. When you work with somebody to develop your skills and to just develop your voice and your sound and get feedback, like, that changes everything. And I think one of the big issues with education today, online education, is that I have no problem with YouTube. I have no problem with Facebook groups and all this kind of stuff. I think it's incredible, like the digital development of education. The problem is that students who are 16, 17, 18 years old, or even 38, 39, 40, 52, whatever, like trying to get back into music, you're so isolated when you're learning online. And that isolation is really a demotivator, and it, and I think, yeah, so number one thing, I think, when we were developing Soundfly, and even just every week when we go into meetings and we talk about this kind of stuff, is like, how do we foster a stronger community? How do we insert more positivity, create more opportunities and stuff, and just create more connections between people within the community or between their mentors and their instructors and stuff? Like, that really changes everything.
My last question will be what I call the magic question for every person interviewed. As far as you can remember, in your childhood, what is the first memory connected to sound or music?
Oh, man. That's a great question to just like dump on someone. Well, okay, I will say that this is not my earliest memory musically, but it is an early memory for sure. When I was very young, my parents had this big station wagon, like an Oldsmobile station wagon, in 87, 88, and they used to always put on tapes of Phantom of the Opera, like the original cast recording of Phantom of the Opera and Les Miserables and stuff like that. And or even if it was music like Peter, Paul and Mary or Bob Dylan or whatever, they didn't have a lot of tapes for the car, right? So what we had was just on loop all the time. It was like if we went on a road trip, we would be listening to the same tape, side A, side B, side A, side B, over and over again. So one of my earliest memories is just a car filled with music and sound and everybody singing along, and just like a big car, just being filled with that sound. And it being really just like a connecting point. Like, I remember this line and Dad remembers this line, and so we're singing together, and just being really familiar and really like enjoying that sound. When you come into the car, this is a place of like sonic immersion. That's a pretty strong memory for me. But I don't think that's my earliest memory. I really got to think about that one. I do remember when I was a toddler, when I was probably a year old or less than a year old. My parents were living in an apartment in Manhattan, and there was a long hallway in the apartment, and there was a row of like lanterns, like lights. There were light bulbs, but they were sort of lantern kind of things that came off the wall, like it was an old apartment. And I remember being really excited when someone turned on and off the lights, and I would sort of look at the lights, like, and look at them like flickering or something, and I would always want to be like watching them when someone like turned on and off the lights. So there was something about that, like this sort of moment of change in the environment. And here's a connection, but one of the people who I think has influenced my compositional and my improvisational mindset and techniques and mental framework, Michael Pizarro. Do you know him? He's a composer. He was a professor at Cal Arts. Now he goes by, I think he got married, and now he took his partner's name. So now I think he goes by Michael Pizarro Lou. But I could be wrong. But anyway, Michael Pizarro, as a composer, I think he was asked once, what is music? Or what is the composer's role? And his response was that music is simply a change in the auditory environment, right? That's all that it is. It doesn't exist in the physical realm. It just exists as airwaves passing by your ears. So it's whatever is happening in the auditory environment at the moment. All music is a change in that environment, and we as humans we react to those changes as environments. So the composer's role simply is just to manage the change with intention. And it's like anybody that has these sort of grandiose visions, like Wagnerian visions of what they want to do with music and create these, that's wonderful, that's great. But I think it's important just to recognize the fact that music really doesn't exist beyond the air molecules that pass your eardrums. So just to sort of like take it down and recognize that all we're doing is contributing to a natural environment that's already there, that's already very musical and full. This environment is completely full with everything that we need as humans to survive. And music is just simply a change in the environment. So if I'm making a connection with myself as a composer now and myself as a toddler who's looking at the lights, I think I was just really into that idea. Like always, my whole life, I just really into this idea of, oh, there's a change in the environment. How does that make me feel? Then that's it. That's what art is. Take it or leave it.
That's super great, super meaningful. Thank you very much for being with us, Jeremy. And
thank you, Gilles.
We wish you the best for next albums and your upcoming tour. If you enjoy watching this content, please drop a like, subscribe, and we will see you on this channel very soon.